Today, we are joined by Inessah Selditz. Inessah, thank you so much for joining us today. I will allow you to introduce yourself and take it away.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, it's so nice to see everyone. And I feel like I see so many people from like ITP to places I work with. So I just wish we could do like a happy hour right now. It'd be so much fun. So I hope everyone's having an amazing spring. I am Inessah Selditz. It's nice to meet everyone. And today we're going to go over building global brand experiences. And I'll just kind of get right into it. And I want to make sure I have like a little bit of time for Q&A afterwards, if there's any questions, which, happy to answer. All right, so let's try and do this. We did a rehearsal before. Let's see if we can do this again. All right, can you see my screen? Everything looks good. Okay, great. Okay, great. So I guess just like a little bit, introduce myself and a little bit about myself. So my name is Inessah. I've been a creative executive at different studios across New York City. So things from like very like architectural and kind of large scale to digital agencies. I say primarily in the world of brand experience and experiential. Way back when my background was in advertising, so pretty kind of classic like traditional like positioning, perception, product, all of that stuff. And then fashion. I was a fashion stylist and editor for many years, way before all of this stuff, another career. And that's really about world building. I think a lot of those things come into play in terms of how people approach their own work and the processes and just like the lens that they think through. And then I went to grad school at ITP. I'm sure there's a lot of ITPers here. Hello. I love all of you. And, I loved ITP. It was great. It's kind of like the Wild West of creative technology. And you kind of just like tinker around for a couple of years. It's great. And then they like set you loose into the world and they're like, figure it out. But I love experiential. It's an interesting field. It always changes and shapeshifts. And I think it attracts a lot of different interesting people with different backgrounds. And, it's something I really love about it. So just kind of covering like just a little bit of like the work that I've done. So I started at Rockwell Group. After ITP, I went to Rockwell Group. It's very architectural and permanent. It's all like kind of planning at large scale. They're really known for like hospitality work and doing like they do like a lot of the Nobus and Edition hotels. And I led the lab at Rockwell Group Studios. So that really they focus on like the brand strategy for the firm and then also the experience and innovation work. So anything that's like really experiential, like the lab would handle it. I'm sure there's some labbers here. I led projects like the Edge at Hudson Yards, something that we'll cover a little bit here, as well as just various other projects. It comes from like a deeply, I'd say like stuff I learned very early on is like kind of like a deeply narrative driven lens for it. At Rockwell, it's really the lens and language of theater. David, the principal, that's his background. And so it really infuses the way that people approach the work within that firm. He's written some monographs called like Pleasure, Spectacle, What If, and Drama. So it's like kind of like big, spectacular ideas is kind of like the world that we're centering in for there. So it's really fun. You do really exciting work. I'm really grateful for my time there because it really has influenced a lot of how, I approach the work and the projects that I've done. I've also gone to like more boutique studios. There's a place called Ada that I was at. They really focus on arts, fashion, and culture and social impact. So, they're Microsoft's long-term experiential agency partner, using a lot of their like AI, like kind of like robust AI tools, and then like, partnering with different like cultural institutions or fashion or arts, whatever, and bringing them to life in different ways. This is a partnership between Microsoft and the Hip Hop Museum to it's a program and platform called Flow Scholar. It's really using AI to so people can learn the history of hip hop and then also create their own lyrics too. Most recently, I was the ECD over at Superfly. They created Bonnaroo and then Outside Lands, the festivals. They sold Bonnaroo a long time ago, but they still own Outside Lands over in San Francisco, if anybody's in the Bay Area. I'd say really like their specialty is like monetized, location-based experiences, IP fan-driven things. We did Netflix as a joke, the Outside Joke experience. So, Netflix, they take over LA to do this like crazy comedy series. It's so much fun. And we did the Outside Festival for it. So I've been doing this for like, I don't know, 12 plus years. And I've probably done like every type of flavor of experience. So like super permanent master plan to pure digital to like every form of like AR, VR, whatever, festivals, campaigns, whatever. Like And recently I went independent. I'm very excited. And anyone who's worked in a studio probably understands. So when Josh contacted me, I think I was on a beach in Mexico. I was just chilling out on a sabbatical. And I was kind of like in a reflective mood. So I just thought it was like a really good time to reflect on the processes and practices and just like really, I'd say the consistent themes I've seen that have, guided me through, very difficult projects. And then also just like things and patterns that, and tools that I've used to kind of get me through these different projects I've had. A lot has changed in the world in the last 10, 15 years, in general, and then for the world of experiences, 10 plus years ago, there weren't experience design studios. Experiential was not really a common term. I'm sure most people here have read The Experience Economy, but it wasn't like a line item on a budget that was pretty clear, right? And something that people desired. So I would say that the spirit of this talk is like really reflecting back, thinking about my own processes, stuff that I really wish somebody had told me when I was like going through some hard times, and just teaching and sharing and passing along knowledge. I really want to thank Josh and Joyce for setting this up and hosting this. It's just so nice to like see so many people I know. And, I've been so fortunate to work with amazing people. And all of these have been done in collaboration with just like really great teams and people, and hopefully some of them are here today. So I wanted to cover today just like, working on kind of global brand experiences. I think, we're in this kind of new era of brand experience. Again, a lot has just changed in the last like decade or so. And so just a couple of grounding thoughts that I was having, brand experience, I don't necessarily think it's exactly branding. Obviously there's relationships, but I think it's a lot of times like a more holistic kind of approach to it and the extrapolation of it. Experiences are really competing for attention, time, money, and affection. Sometimes like competition is not the other hotel. It's like getting people off their couch and off of TikTok. It is hard to get people, out and experiencing stuff in the world. I have talked to every single client across whatever spectrum, so brands, cultural institutions, attractions, festivals, et cetera. Like they're all really asking the same questions and encountering the same problems. How do we stay relevant? How do we position for growth? We want to be differentiated. We want to attract new audiences, oftentimes younger audiences, and ultimately create a holistic experience, right? And as more people enter into the experience economy and just like new formats, it just adds a lot of complexity where there's really a need for a holistic approach. I would say like top-down strategies to really guide these decisions. Like, once you get to like, just big long-term master plan projects, like there's so many stakeholders and decision makers and teams, it can get really confusing and kind of like lost in the sauce where ultimately when the project opens, all someone wants who may not know your brand or does know your brand wants to experience their own journey in it. So, these things have been helpful for me. And I'd also say like strategies and frameworks for, where I think things oftentimes go wrong and how to like kind of correct to it or figure out where things are going wrong, right? There's a slide actually from when I was teaching over at Parsons, I guess, New School. So I would say there's like the internal framework. I oftentimes think of it just like the skeleton, you don't really see it. And that's like really the scaffolding and the structure that you need alignment, like strong alignment internally to get the project across the line. And all of the stuff that people experience is really that external expression of all the things that you kind of agreed upon, with this internal framework. This is a framework that I kind of learned pretty early on, and I think has like really served me when I was thinking about things that have kind of been things I've kind of like pulled back from. And even if I'm not doing this process holistically, I kind of think things center around like these kind of core issues. And I'll go through it kind of at a top level here, but when I think about the brand experience and you're kind of starting from a holistic level, there's kind of the internal structure and that external expression, right? So when I'm thinking about like a project, you think about like just the project, right? So what are the, objectives, issues, like, SWOTs are often done in kind of this sector and things that are really informing the brand preferences, stakeholders, all that kind of stuff. There's also times like the customers too, like, sometimes you have an older demographic, but you want a newer demographic, like really understanding who is your customer, audience, visitor, whatever. The competition and like landscape, like what is the landscape? If you're opening up a hotel in Vegas, you can't just open up a hotel in Vegas, right? You really need to understand what people's choices are. And you can't just throw something up immediately unless you have a brand that's very clear. And all of that really informs, like, all these kind of like inputs inform a brand positioning story. And that's really that internal idea that defines the, desired customer experience, the core value proposition. And, this really works between all kinds of different experiences, from like hospitality to museums to retail, whatever. And then you kind of have these brand pillars, different attributes that differentiate and reinforce the brand and the positioning, and really serve as that filter for execution. And fashion, they're called codes. So like Versace has like Medusa heads, right? So it's kind of those things that like reinforce what the brand is about. And then you get like the brand execution guidelines. So these are really, in my head, like the external expression of it. It's really how the brand comes to life based off of the positioning and pillars, and just specific guidelines for implementing the brand across different areas. So this encompasses like all of design, like architecture, the website, whatever, naming, identity, programming, service, and rituals, very important in hospitality. And so it for me, it becomes much more holistic of the world that you're trying to build versus just like a space or a website or whatever. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through a couple of projects. I'm going to focus a little bit on the internal part of it first, just because I think it's the part that like I didn't really understand, but I would see a lot of problems because it wasn't thought through first. And I think also sometimes like it just like isn't really discussed, and just talking through some of the thinking for it. And then we'll see how it all like kind of comes together in the end. So this is a project that I worked on called Baha Mar. It's the largest casino in the Caribbean. I think it's the largest hospitality destination in the Caribbean too. It's like a very, very large property. It has several different hotels, a Rosewood, SLS, all of that stuff here. And so I oftentimes felt, and I'm sure most people here have been in this case, when you're in the middle of design and people are designing and throwing like spaghetti at the wall and concepts against the wall, and like nothing seems to stick. And I think a lot of times it's because there's not like a lot of times been alignment on the ownership side of what the opportunity and what they really want to offer the customers. And so they get pretty far into, I've seen projects very, very far into design where that has actually not been discussed or aligned upon. And so when I came to this, like some of the teams were into design. It was like a little bit of an SOS of they couldn't get, because they were spinning on design, they needed some internal alignment or filter to start making decisions against, because people were just kind of burning out. And so the first thing that you do is kind of like that project competition, like that's really an audit. It's a survey of everything that's going on. And so that is like the first thing you really need to do. And oftentimes, like for me, I would have to do this like very, very quickly, and it's super challenging. But you really need to study like what is being offered in the market. And so, when I go in, like oftentimes if it's like an actual place that you can go to or study, I study the master plan, right? And I oftentimes felt there's like different typologies of experience. And so for us, like we're looking at different experience, like, okay, well, what are the experiences that would be competitive? So one is like no experience. There's no, it's a master plan, but they don't have like a huge amount of experiences. There's obviously a beach and pools and stuff like that, but it's not really grounded around like something that feels experiential, right? The second one that we found was a singular theme. So like a really dominant theme of like, and everything kind of extracts from it. So that's like Atlantis. So Atlantis is also in the Bahamas. It's the major property there. And so, it's like everything is around this water park essentially. And that's the driving theme and narrative that's grounding all the experiences around it. And so when you do like a little bit more research on like the brand, and obviously like Atlantis is top of mind, like the first thing I usually do is honestly go to their Instagram. You can tell almost immediately what story that they're telling. And I would say like what this exercise is really helpful for is understanding what stories other people are trying to tell. That's like pretty advertising-y, but you have to understand like what are they trying to tell, and how is that, what experience are they delivering for it? And so when you think of Atlantis, like Atlantis is essentially a myth, right? I think it's like a under the sea thing. It's like you can see, I just like grab these, I think, from their Instagram. So you can immediately tell what kind of experience they're trying to craft and create. And when you're thinking about brands, like, you're really trying to force apart differentiation and create meaningful differentiation in white space and finding the white space. So with Atlantis, and I really try and keep this like on paper level, like Word document style, because I come from a visual background, so, and I know other people are like, art direction based and stuff like that. You can get very like consumed with imagery very quickly. And so for Atlantis, like I just put on one side, like what is it not and what is it kind of a thing, because you want to do that compare and contrast, right? So if LNS is like about a fantasy and like a dominant programming element and one brand and like very themey, what does Baha Mar want to be? It really wants to be a reality, and based in that kind of feeling of realness, authenticity is thrown around a lot. A collection of diverse experiences, and instead of expectation, we want surprise. Instead of kind of closed off from the outside, we want to feel connected to the island. Instead of one brand, it's multiple brands. Instead of a theme, we want kind of like this invisible ethos that kind of goes through there, right? So at a very simple truth, like what we're trying to pull apart is, like this like differentiation and like, frankly, the consumer mind of, Atlantis is a myth. At the heart of Baha Mar is a collection of truths. And that gets us to the narrative of spectacularly real. This is, I think I worked on this like 10 years ago. I think this language is still used on the website today in terms of like the idea that like what we wanted to really deliver and what we were trying to communicate to the ownership is delivering this like, collection of experiences that felt both kind of spectacular and grand and amazing, and also just like real and intimate, and like, what is it like to drink like coconut on the beach and see the flamingos from the local island and taste food that is authentic and local, and starting to carve that away from a comparison which is, based in a myth, right? And so it was really based on this idea of like an archipelago of experiences and creating your own moment, kind of like this lily pad of things of choice. And so like you'll often find it, especially with like, bigger plans, you can study their plans and see what kind of like experience they're offering, right? And this translates to the master plan. Some of this was in development, some of it wasn't, but having like these big kind of destinations within a macro resort. And then within them, you have these tentpole kind of spectacular experiences. We're proposing like a local farm and a circular surf lake, and they have the casino, and then within it they have like the rituals and intimate moments that really reinforce all that kind of stuff that was aligned on at a very high level. And so you can imagine, like, it's been 10 years since then, it's going to go on for a long time, like how these decisions get people aligned to get them to a place of actually making decisions. Like there's a lot of design teams working on this. There's landscapers, there's website designers, there's advertising firm, like a lot of stuff where you need to make decisions day in and day out. And having something in your head which you can go back to, and you can have major stakeholders nod their head and say, yes, this is what we're going after, is really the core of this. And so of course, not every project is going to have something of this scale in terms of just like the footprint or the ask or anything like that. But I think that the exercise has really taught me what to do after doing it for, just different projects and different types of, industries and stuff like that. It really teaches you to be able to audit very quickly and analyze what stories people are trying to tell, and then synthesize all of that information very quickly to what I found is like you're getting all this information, you're synthesizing it down, and then you're basically exploding it into a world, right? And oftentimes, a lot of the teams and agencies are in like the world building, but the ownership or whatever, like these are complicated projects. They haven't done that internal work to make sure that we're in the right direction of that world building. And so it's the ability to like ingest and digest information, synthesize it, and then like kind of extrapolate it very quickly and just like analyze what's going on. So to give just like an example of how like I think the thinking works on a totally different type of project is Nike. And so Nike, this is 2013, I think, sorry, 23. And so we were working with them for, I don't know, I guess like 2 or 3 years. We work with their core global team out in Portland on a series of different, like initiatives that they have. And, they write, brand experience playbooks. These are, aligned with, we essentially deliver core concepts against these initiatives, aligned with global. And then they disseminate them out to the world in terms of like a playbook that, a lot of people, a lot of like global brands, this is kind of how they approach doing certain types of work. And so this isn't actually from the presentation, but I think kind of distills down like the core problem solving that needs to happen when you get a certain request of trying to analyze what stories are being told and then how to extrapolate out to a different world. They had an initiative that was focused on women, and I guess for a while the message had been pretty centered in like performance only. And this was post-COVID, and so The new kind of strategy was like more holistic mind, body, and just like kind of wellness in total, as well as feeling like very Nike-ish, right? You know, I would say a lot of the creativity comes in the interpretation and the tone and the curation and the nuance of how, you know, each agency or studio or whatever like interprets like kind of an initial directive. And so understanding like, again, the very first thing I did is that I went to their Instagram and I just pulled an image. This wasn't actually the exact image, but I did have a page very similar to this of pulling an image similar to this of like, this is the story that we're currently telling. Their team is super smart and knows their strategies. And then this is actually, you know, the territory that we want to be in, right? So again, it's really that like, you have to be able to boil and synthesize it down like very quickly to, we're not telling this story, we want to tell that story, and get some like head nods that this is the right direction. And then you can really explode this out into like world building, right? And you know, like really kind of like go crazy, you know, luckily working with them, like they're really cool and they want like innovative, exciting ideas. But if you're not even in the right white space or territory, I find it becomes very difficult. This is just like swipe that I sent into them after we complete the concepts, but kind of gives you an idea of the type of things that we propose for them. I definitely like kind of flashy imagery, hot tip for art directions and stuff. Like, I know every time like I have a team member on my team or like I go to a place, I have them open up their own Instagram accounts. They're totally separate. And like, you got to follow like super niche people who are following other people. You got to see like, I don't want Pinterest images. I know like every single like image on Pinterest, like you got to go deep and you got to find new stuff too that feels exciting. And so you really get into like this world of just like explosive world building, right? And again, it's really about just like pulling apart very quickly that differentiation. But I would say like that framework is what's really allowed me to kind of go through like the exercises where like it's like running water through the pipe a little bit, and you can kind of tell like where you want to triangulate of like where you want to take those tools and like get you to a separated place. And so we have like the internal framework, and oftentimes obviously that leads to external expression, right? And so like, you know, once we do all of that, like, you know, let's put this together basically of like, let's go through like the internal stuff and like how it leads to external. This is probably like a 3-hour lecture, but I'm trying to boil it down to like 40 minutes, but hopefully that'll be helpful. I'll spend like a little less time on like the external stuff in terms of like the master planning stuff, because I think a lot of people here have probably done master planning, but I will kind of like pull out some tips and tricks and just point out like some of the approaches I've learned that have been just really helpful for me for, you know, tackling like complicated spaces and stories and programming and, you know, operation stuff, honestly, at the end of the day. Okay, so the interesting thing is like when I started working in architecture studio, you just kind of assume that like, you know, you see the built world around you, you're like, oh, like someone thought of that thing and somebody had the idea. So like a client comes to you and they have an idea of like what they want to do, which is just definitely not true. Like a lot of times people will just buy a building and be like, we want to put a hotel up. And like people are like, who's going to think of the hotel? Like what hotel do you want to put up? Like what museum do you want to put, you know, it's kind of just like wild that that's the way the world works. And so if someone doesn't have like an original narrative, like someone must conjure up a story for this, right? Like someone just has to do it. And so there's a lot of decisions and that are banking on that decision for large scale projects that affect it, you know, 2, 5, 10 years down the line of that development for it. So again, this internal framework has really helped me just guide the external expression. I found that like, if you can get that alignment, like things go a lot easier towards the end. So a project that I worked on is the Hudson Yards observation deck. So Hudson Yards, people in New York obviously probably know it, but it's the most expensive real estate deal in US history. If you actually go to the site, it's quite small, but it's just so expensive to build in New York City. And it's on top of like railroad tracks. It's, you know, kind of a crazy site. And they have like an observation deck there that at the time when, you know, Related was a client for like close to 5 years. And I'd done work with them before, but when we started, it's like, it was literally like a hole in the ground. And most people had not even heard of Hudson Yards. So it's kind of like a wild contrast to be, you know, taking on a project when you're literally looking at a hole in the ground, right? And at the time the observation deck project came through, you're still kind of looking at this construction site and a narrative needs to be created for the experience, right? And so first, before even getting into that, I did the exact same exercise of like, I am not an expert on like, maybe now after that, I'm an expert on observation decks, but at the time, I'd been in New York for like a long time and not even gone to a single one of the observation decks here. So I was like, I got to go do a site visit. So again, kind of like the study and the merchandising of it. So very quickly, there's a group that are basically old guard art deco is what we call them. Like when you're thinking about competition, you kind of want to bucketize things in different and merchandise them in different groups, right? So it's kind of like stuff that was built during the art deco period. It's very like old guard, old world kind of stuff, glamorous, which you see in movies type thing. Then there's like what we call the only game in town. And so, it's like if you're a city and you have one observation deck, you don't really have a lot of competition. Like, who cares? It's just the thing, you go to it. And then current kind of trends are sophisticated hospitality in the sky, and then like a unique narrative. So, a restaurant plus like a unique narrative, right? And so at the time, like kind of like where I'm at is like there's a hole in the ground. The building wasn't even built at that point. There's 3 observation decks. It already passed through a bunch of different studios trying to get this narrative. It was hard. And so this is an exercise I actually did with my classes. Like at the time, there are 3 observation decks. And so when you're thinking about a narrative, the hard thing is getting it down to a simple place. And so it's obvious now, but was not obvious at the time, is that when you're looking at the observation decks of New York City, they're all telling a story, right? I don't know if somebody's been to all 3 of them. I mean, does anybody have a guess like what these all have in common in terms of the stories that they're telling? Anyone? So they're all inherently telling stories of the past, right? It's like you're talking about the Empire State, like, Art Deco for sure, entertainment. If you go to Top of the Rock, I know people some of them have updated their experiences. Top of the Rock, it was an old story when I went about building New York City, and One World is about 9/11. And so these are stories about the past. And so do we want to tell a story of the past? That is where, judgment comes in terms of like what direction you want to go in strategically. But we don't. We want to tell a story of the future. Hudson Yards is inherently a story about the future of cities. And so is decided upon, I'm saying it casually, like, this was an easy decision, that the story wanted to be about the future of cities. Again, we were on a totally different concept for 7 months before we got to future of cities. So a little easier said than done, but that was the story that we wanted to tell. And I found like, so the question is like, what is a future city? When I think of future city, like back then I was like, it could be Jetsons, it could be Tron was really popular then too. I was like, I don't know. It's like, is it flying cars? I'm not sure. And what I found was like, it's really helpful is that when we're sitting in meetings with like, stakeholder, and they have a lot of competing interests, a lot of stories, and, just like pet projects, which, naturally, it's definitely their prerogative, is I just like sit down and listen and I take notes. I know we all have AI note takers, but like I literally just take my own notes, and you have to listen extremely carefully to what they're saying, because oftentimes I found that they will really be able to tell you what it is not and kind of tell you what it is. And so if you can at least get to a place of what it is not, you can start building to what it is. And again, pulling apart that differentiation, right? So what it is not a brand new piece of land. It is about rejuvenation on top of railroad tracks. We are building land on top of old land. It is not horizontal sprawl. Like there's a lot of cities that are very sprawled out. We are vertical. It's about coming together in pleasant density. It's not like people are stacked on top of each other. It is not congestion. Like some cities, like there's, like hours in a car. Accessible is easy. It's not theoretical. It was very important that it was like, it's a realized project. It's real. They did it. And it's not unconsidered. It's very considered, right? And I'd say when like you're listening to a lot of voices, I mean, like I read a lot of documents about Hudson Yards. There's a lot of facts and figures about it. And so you're trying to process a ton of information very quickly. And so for me, this has been like the most helpful thing is just what it is not, because people oftentimes have very clear pictures of what it isn't to get you to a grounding point of what it is. These are just like old sketches. Like what I like to do is just put the words, if I can just center on the words, I can get some images and start building, compare and contrast type things. So what is not is, horizontal, difficult access, congestion, like it is resilient or not resilient. to start building like what it is, like what is the future city, and its rejuvenation, and it's something beautiful from disuse and human based, and in taking their words, these are their words, and then building a world against it. And I'm like, oh, it's not the Jetsons, it's not Tron. And that kind of gets you more to like where you can start really building that world. I wouldn't even say those are mood boards. Those are just really just me trying to conceptually draw things together to where you can get to that, like, you know, you can work with a great art director and explode out that vision to something really exciting. So this is like a mood board that we have of just like crafting out what that world was. I work with like a fabulous art director. A lot of things we're thinking about was just like a sense of like romance. It's, you know, on the western side of New York City, and thinking about sunsets and hues and making it wanting to feel warm and all that stuff. How to color correct your images if you can, brings it all together. But just like kind of painting a picture of something that felt like innovation based and also a little romantic and like human based too. And just obviously like tremendous materiality. Once you get the narrative though, I think a lot of us know there's a lot of ways to like slice and dice a building. It is complicated. There's 2 lower level floors with complicated queuing. There's an elevator ride up. There is 2 more floors on the top. And so like we literally had like a sketch party. We just like printed out little buildings and we had people draw like different like there's 10,000 ways to do like narratives of like the future city here. And it's really fun, but eventually you got to put like, you know, like a stake in the ground, right? What I found was really helpful of, again, like I think museums all the times have this problem too. It's a lot of information and everyone wants to tell their stories, and then everyone tells their stories, so no story kind of gets told. Is that if you can align stakeholders on an important point that they want it to communicate or get across, you know, you can say 3 things, but you can only say 1 thing first. And if you get some head nods in that, like I found that's really helpful. And we're working with this, you know, she was phenomenal CMO at the time. And she was like, the place that we emotionally want people to be is that you're at the top of the floor. We want people to think, wow, I'm really standing on the feet of engineering and technology and ingenuity. Like this is the future city. And if we can get everyone to agree upon that, that gives me a really clear way to reverse engineer out of it, because you start editing out a lot of things. Like there's only so many ways to get someone who is in their head at the time is a construction zone in a hole in the ground to that kind of thought. And so you literally have to like chapterize and simplify the story from 0 knowledge to that feeling and that emotion, that kind of cognitive state. And then you can really start building the building blocks to get to that, to at least get a story framework and a narrative framework in place. So the queue is a linear path. It goes up the elevator and then it's kind of like free form there. I like to start blocking out spaces. I won't go too much into this, but I like to kind of chapterize it, block it out, just study the flows. Like this is just some exercises that I did of the choreography. Again, like a lot of complicated, like mechanical stuff you got to get through. It's a whole project. Just to show like my process, like I'm very, very sketch level. I like to stay sketch level as long as I possibly can. I will rip through a bunch of like tear like super quickly. When I'm doing the master planning myself, I will sit down with a plan and storyboards, and I will like do iteration after iteration, like very, very quickly, and plan out choreographies and see alternatives. And you can kind of see here, like if there's anyone from theater backgrounds, like this is probably, you know, like I did this at when like, you know, I'm thinking about theater and stuff like that. So you can kind of see how it looks like a choreography of space. And then as I'm going through there, I'm also like planning shots in my head of like where I want like the architecture shot, the render and all that stuff, like the key beauty shots. And those often become like the base for the photography at the end of the day. No one should ever be embarrassed about their hand sketches. These are my hand sketches. They are terrible. But again, like I like to stay very wireframey. Like I would say at the core, I feel like I identify as being like an experience or interaction designer. So I stay at like, I like to stay at a wireframe level as long as humanly possible. And I want to get the thinking done. And I know there's people who have like work with me here is that like, I want fast iterations like very quickly, because I found people tend to really stay and kind of like lock into something without like doing the testing really quickly and forcing themselves through the exercise. Because again, these are just complicated spaces and you have to like resolve stuff along a journey going through different spaces before you can kind of land on stuff. I have like a template. It's just like a storyboard, key moments of the journey. I often think about it like making a little movie for people. I don't come from a cinematic background, but I found that's really helpful. A couple books I can recommend, they're on my website too, that I really love is Sketching User Experiences and Understanding Comics, great books. And it's just like, doing narratives and like little sketches. And I have like a little person a lot of times that, like I'll just draw and have them go through like a little movie. I often think like any kind of experience, like a library, a hotel, a retail, experience center, museum, whatever, you can kind of boil it down to 6 storyboards or something like that of the key beats of it. And that's why I like to get and like have like, I like a concept thing, I like a mood board, I like 6 key moments, and I like this emotional arc too, to make sure that I'm thinking about the emotional and cognitive state of people as they go through this experience, and also crafting reasons to return. I really wish, we had thought about this more. And I think a lot of people are thinking about programming and reasons to return. But really just making sure we're thinking about people's emotions, like have you ever walked through something and you're like, oh, it's a really flat experience? And it's kind of like, if you don't plan for it and put it in your planning, it just honestly doesn't really happen. And then you get something like this, and it's interesting because when I started a long time ago, I just remember I was talking to a friend from grad school from ITP, and we're kind of commiserating, and it was like our first jobs, and I was like, I see like the Cosmo Hotel and like all these like amazing, incredible projects that are finished. I was like, oh my God, I just want to know the process of getting from 0 to like 100 and finished. And I just did not have a concept of it. And obviously you gain that with experience, but like, it's really how, like, for me, like I try and build stuff and think through like kind of difficult projects of getting that internal framework done, and then like going through the process of like, crafting the world and design for it. And so when we go back to the brand experience, like 101, again, not every single project needs to do this. And a lot of times clients don't want to go through this exercise. But what I've seen more times than not is that, a lot of firms come in at the design phase when a lot of the top level stuff has not actually been answered. Like you're getting random thoughts from stakeholders. They're kind of like, we want younger people, but we're not really thinking about younger people, what they want. There's no kind of like exciting things actually on the floor plan for young people. Why are we opening up a French restaurant? There's 5 fresh French restaurants in this neighborhood, like all kinds of stuff where you're like, certainly someone has thought that through. And I found a lot of problems we are far down the line of it versus having done this homework, honestly in the beginning. And at this point for me, it's kind of just like running water through the pipes. And, anybody who has their own experience or is doing this, like you can do this with your own experience. If you work in a library or a restaurant, like you can evaluate your own experience through this too. You can do this work and you can do your storyboards and be like, is this experience really what we're promising, what we're selling? Is the story clear enough? Does it feel compelling against something else? It's really something that you can do and start working on. And I give these like frameworks, when I teach, like I give these to my students. I'm like, try it for yourself, like go to a different experience and see if you can fill it in and reverse engineer what story they're trying to tell you and what are the key moments. That's actually their first homework that they do. And then see if you can recreate something that's different and better, right? And so I'd say just like some key takeaways, just like brand one, parity is bad. You do not want the same. Like see if sameness, that's kind of usually what it's called. Like you do not want the same. And like it is always about crafting meaningful differentiation, not just like cool for cool sake or whatever. It's like white space in the market, crafting differentiation. I often think the best kind of like concepts, they're competitive, you're not doing the exact same thing as someone else. It's not saturated. It's cogent, it's clear. I brand strategy comes in a lot of different flavors. I don't like mystical, like I can read it, a normal person can read it, we can all get excited about it, and it's compelling, it's exciting, it's Nike, it's Western front romance. Like, I don't know, I like a little like razzle dazzle, I come from fashion. What can I say? You want to protect against commoditization. And so trying to plan in for like, all right, well, if people flood this market, what are things that we can protect that are going to feel different in the future? The internal framework, external expression. And then we get to the actual master planning, trying to reverse engineer the story, planning for emotional benchmarks and, finding reasons to return. I guess just like looking forward, I know the world is like kind of wild and weird, and there's all these kind of like things changing, but I have like a weird personality. Like I don't know, I kind of like the wildness. I don't know. But key things like, demographics, like things that I've been thinking of as like kind of space has been opening up in my head is just we're going through very large demographic changes right about now. Like in the next 15 years, this is really rapidly going to change. Loneliness is a real issue post-COVID. That was already an issue. Luxury, we're minting a lot of billionaires in this world. There's probably going to be a trillionaire in our lifetime. IP explosion, I think wellness holistically is going to be very important. Obviously, a lot of live workplace shifts, travel hospitality booms, and like entertainification. I didn't actually say that loud, so you know what I mean with that. Glimmers, I don't know, like I don't know if you would call them glimmers. Like I get like weird spidey senses, like in 2008, I quit my job in publishing because I was like, I was like, this industry, like, I don't know, I gotta get out of here. Like, you're not gonna evolve to the internet. And so, but I was just like getting glimmers of like exciting things like the internet and I don't know, like interactions and all that fun stuff. So I think I'm feeling in the air, like things like social clubs being on the rise. I think new third spaces. I think a lot of museums, like they really need to think of themselves as like, how do we position ourselves as a third space where people can really be, like greeted as a hospitality experience, all that kind of stuff. Branded third spaces, nostalgia trips. Hallmark did a cruise. I'm like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Love it. Wellness formats, new ones, senior care centers. My parents are getting older. Like, what's the Apple Care, connected care kind of center? I want to design it. Nature as a destination, attraction. I think that's going to be super interesting. Certainly new living typologies. I really want to live in a commune. I'm not going to lie. There's this place called Cul-de-sac in Tempe. I'm totally into it. Like, I'm hoping they give me a call at some point. I love it. There's no cars in it. It's very cool. City identities and experiences, a CXO for cities and museum. Would love a call from the MTA or like New York City. It would be great. Branded travel, I think for sure. Four Seasons did a jet a long time ago. For sure, I think that's a possibility. Transportation revolution, again, MTA, like, gotta get it together. Branded theaters, A24, if they did a theater, would love that phone call. Amazing. Malls need reinvention. And I think overall, you're going to see probably like new formats just mashing up together. So I think it's just going to be a really fun, exciting time. And, I think is really great for, the people, hopefully in this, room, is that like a lot of you are going to be deciding what these look like, and I think that's really exciting. And we need people who are excited and passionate about it and really think about the human experience at the end of the day. So that is it. That is my spiel. You can find me all here in these different formats and stuff. My name's kind of original, so very easy to find. But I'm happy to answer questions. I can stay a little bit longer if people need to. But hopefully that gives like a little sense of the work that I do and how I think about it and all that stuff.
All right. Inessah, that was awesome. I love it. So y'all know the drill. Come camera on and ask some questions. Inessah, you're good for to stay a few extra minutes. I think I could do it too.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right. So if anybody doesn't have any questions, I have a few. So I guess one of the questions I have is like I love how you had that sort of the sort of 5-tier kind of brand story structure or like branding structure, and then you saw then design was on that bottom tier, and you're like that's like kind of when we get pulled in a lot of times. Like, what do
Yeah.
you do when you get pulled into the 11th hour to design something and like you haven't been privy to all the other steps? Like how do you roll it back, or like how do you make sure that you're not stuck executing something that doesn't have a brand vision?
Oh man, it's really, I would say it's like, it's tough, honestly. I would say a lot of times I was called in to do that work was because it was pretty much at like an SOS period of like a lot of like spin and churn and people were really frustrated on, all different sides. And so I'd say that, you kind of need to try and do that work. I've tried to like sneak it in a little bit. And sometimes people are like, I don't want to do that thing, but I'd say like the listening part of it and trying to build a little bit of a structure, even if you can get the internal teams to align, I found that helpful. But I mean, a lot of times it's really at a point where it's like, it's clear that it's needed and should have been done is kind of the issue. So I'd say that like the more that you can sell it in the front end, I think is better. I mean, I don't want to undersell it and say like it doesn't take time to do, but like it's not as difficult once you start checking Instagram, checking, the competitive server. Like it doesn't actually take that much time. It's the alignment that takes a bit.
All right. Miriam had a question. Miriam, do you want to ask? You want me to ask for you?
Hi, hello everyone. Hi, Nessa. Thank you so much for your amazing presentation. It was very inspiring. And I was wondering if you add any sound design to the experience of the building, like to the Hudson Yards, because I know that's always a very important part of experience design. And I was wondering if it's an open space, like how you handled it.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, God, who gave me this tip? But like, I sometimes like to make playlists for my projects. It's not every single project, but I think for Hudson Yards, I think I started off in like the Tron area. Then I was like, I don't think this is the vibe for them. So I would say definitely do a playlist. And then we had a presentation, it was a keynote. We took snippets. So every single like area, we would have snippets. It wasn't full sound, like I'm not a sound designer, but we would just get snippets of like what a train should sound like. And we just kind of mash them up. And so as the slide would play, you would kind of hear sounds. So you would imagine yourself in that world. But it's a really good question.
All right. Okay, so let's see. Sorry, my landlord is bothering me. All right, I have a question. So for something like that sort of Baha Mar project, like, did you go? Did you go to the Bahamas and experience it yourself?
Oh, I went to the Bahamas. Oh, I sure did. I've been
You
on this
did?
times and it's always been for work, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess. I don't know. But yes, I did go to the resort. Yeah, it's beautiful.
And like, well, and I guess the question is like, do you think that's like necessary to do? Like, is it necessary to like actually experience these places to be able to envision them? I mean, obviously Hudson Yards was a hole in the ground, so like you
Yeah.
had to you had to, you could
Yeah.
experience that.
I would say, I mean, I say absolutely ideally you should visit it if you can. Like, I feel like I couldn't synthesize stuff unless I went to the other observation decks in New York City. So I mean, I couldn't assess what Hudson Yards was, but I could assess what the other ones were. And from like just, average stats of like floor heights or whatever, compared to like you can start triangulating what makes a good experience, right? Or like what they're trying to sell and what their experience is crafted after. So any way you can get information. Another tip, I look at TripAdvisor. I'm like, I'm gonna go to TripAdvisor and see what people are saying. Like, I dig. I'm like, I'm going to Instagram, I'm going to TikTok, I'm going to TripAdvisor, and I want to see what people are really saying because people oftentimes like they want to tell you it's a certain thing, but you'll get kind of the real deal basically.
I love it. Okay, I think there was a bit of a question earlier on. I think it was like talking about hmm, how you sort of scout an Instagram. Like, so I mean, one, are there any like things that we should like any accounts we should follow? But like also like if today I was like I want to revamp my Instagram followers, like or following, like what should I do?
I would say, kind of like I said, like, when I remember when I was working at a firm, they had like a lighting designer, and the principal was like, I don't want to see that lamp anymore. I see it on
Yeah,
everybody's like page. And so like everyone's pulling, you have to assume like everyone's pulling from Pinterest and they're mostly ads anyways at this point. So it's like if you are a great art director, you got to get your own Instagram, you got to get your own sources, you have to have your own collection. And I found that Instagram has the best designers and sources. You got to curate your own like create a completely separate account because it's already been, like your aunt's on the other one, whatever. And you got to go deep into communities. Like if you're doing an experience for Nike or whoever, and you want to go after the skateboarding community, like you better be in the skateboarding community's Instagram and triple click into who people are following because you want that authenticity. You want to find things that are on kind of like the verge. Like for me, that's really exciting. And you're not going to get that from whatever, like a generic like platform. So you have to actually do the work of going to these communities and doing the curation and all that kind of stuff. And I want to be surprised by, my art directors and creative directors too, because like I can pull really fast and quickly. So I want someone who's dedicated to that full time to pull really fast and quickly and better than I can pull.
I love it. Clay had a question. Clay, you want to ask?
Sure. I'm just wondering, sorry, no camera. Um, Following up on what you were talking about a few minutes ago, when you are building something that is just currently a hole in the ground, do you use any pre-visualization techniques like virtual reality or architectural visualization using computer graphics or anything like that to try and get a sense of a space, or is it just kind of not worth it?
No. I find like VR is like most helpful for kind of the pre-visualization stuff. I mean, I think early on at the lab, we set a VR thing to do fly-throughs and we had that pipeline pretty rigged up. I would say now you can use things like Enscape. I do think virtual reality gives you the most kind of accurate sense of scaling, and it definitely changes your perception of things. So I would for sure say you should set up like Enscape or a VR tool, to get in your pipeline, because it's just like, it's an obvious thing, but like when I first started working at architectural scale, like, you're looking on a screen, something on a screen for like 3 years. It is very different in real life. And obviously, if you're an experienced architect, you can kind of judge what it'll feel like. But like anything that you can do and any kind of prototyping you can do to feel what the space is like, barring visiting it, you should definitely, do pretty early on.
And
Awesome.
then the inevitable follow-up, do you use any AI tools in your work?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Josh and I were just chatting before this about, I was like, I just got to sit down with like AI. I mean, AI is great for like, mood boarding and finding the right image or, art direction type stuff. I think I need to just get my general processes into it. But I'd say for like, especially art directors and, it's good for brainstorming too, but it's not going to build the whole thing. Like I have great confidence in AI, but I think a lot of what you're going to see is like absolute, like, a need for very curated taste. When you can copy everything from everyone, I think taste is really going to matter. Curation is really going to matter. And like people's kind of like ability to distill that down into a specific worldview is really going to matter.
All right, I love it. All right, so okay, I'm gonna make a real quick shout out to last week's speaker, Kate Kim, who actually did some amazing stuff at Foveate around visualization and like real-time visualization stuff. So very, very cool tool, like sort of like a Figma for multi-user visualization. All right, so Ian, I'm gonna let you have the last question, and then Inessah, I'm gonna let you sort of sign us off. Ian, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. So one of the big events coming up soon and in the future that everyone's excited about is the Olympics in LA 2028. And I was wondering, how do you see brands strategically integrating themselves into that event?
I see brands strategically integrating themselves into the event. I think the IOC is like pretty strict on that stuff, but I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if I totally have an answer, but I feel like, if you're anything into the wellness space, you should probably be trying to show up at LA in the Olympics, like for sure. I don't know the last time the Olympics was in the US and certainly not in a place like LA. And so if you're in the wellness space and not trying to show up at the Olympics, somehow like blessed, but it's like, it is like the tentpole event, and it's the Summer Olympics, which is really exciting, and an amazing place like LA. Like they definitely should be I mean, like for sure Nike's got to do something, right? But so should On and everybody else. And even if you're like the mental health space, like, why wouldn't you, in like an amazing place with just so many events going on, so many people interested in wellness. I think it's a huge opportunity for people and super exciting.
Well, thank you.
So Nessa, thank you so much. This was like super, super interesting, super inspiring. Do you have any sort of like parting words for the community before we leave here today?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's just like, I love seeing so many people like, across like, I don't know, just like we've crossed paths before, and it's really great to see people. And it's amazing group of people from so many different walks of life. What I really loved about ITP is like they really brought people in from different walks of life. And I think that's what makes it special, honestly. And a lot of just like great viewpoints and lenses people are thinking from. And I think, again, kind of like on my last note, like I know the kind of world is a little topsy-turvy, but there's also like amazing problems to be solved in this world that I think a lot of people in this room are going to be responsible for solving for. And so like the care and sensitivity and thought, like I encourage you just to like be optimistic and think how you can bring forward and like just make amazing experiences. Like everything needs it. Like everything needs reimagine, like cities and libraries and retail and like they all need like a different lens and point of view. And I think these are the people to do it. So, you know, I'm super excited. Please reach out. I sent in like office hours that I just set up, and, you know, I just went independent. So I'm just excited about like exploring the world again. It's really nice.
All right, awesome. Inessah, thank you again. That was super awesome. Thank you everybody for being here today.